Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of Tales from the Hard Side, presented by Dipalo Ventures. My name is Shahan Mirza, and I'm a VC analyst at Dipalo Ventures, and I'll be serving as a coordinator for this session. Please note that this is a pre-recorded session. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment section, and we'll respond to them as soon as we get a chance. In today's episode, we have the privilege of welcoming our host, Rafiq, Managing Director of Dipalo Ventures, alongside our distinguished guest, Biju, the co-founder and CEO of Halo Investing. So, just to do a little intro, Rafiq Rafiq's early career in technology product innovation started with management consultants, PwC, and Sapient, and included corporates Fannie Mae and Motorola Mobility. His 2 decades in startups include founding and exiting storytelling platforms, DemiBooks, angel investments, fund LP positions, as well as starting hard tech VC Dipalo Ventures. A little intro to Dipalo Ventures. Dipalo Ventures is a Chicago-based early-stage venture capital firm specializing in hard tech. We nurture and guide founders working on hard tech solutions that require deep technical knowledge and product development support. The firm invests in technology breakthroughs with a high impact on greenhouse gas emissions that receive limited venture capital funding, such as in specific sectors within energy transition, industrial and manufacturing, food and agricultural tech, and the built environment. Finally, a little intro for Biju. Biju is the co-founder and CEO of Halo Investing, where he leads the vision, strategy, technology, and team. He was one of the early co-founders of Redbox. Biju also received a BS in aerospace engineering from Illinois Institute of Technology. Halo Investing is an award-winning technology platform that disrupts how protective investment solutions are used worldwide. Headquartered in Chicago with offices in Abu Dhabi and Zurich, where they're democratizing access to investment solutions that were previously unavailable to most investors. Their marketplace connects financial advisors and investors to protective investment products offered by leading global financial institutions. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Rafiq here.
Thank you and welcome, Biju. Actually, Biju's welcoming me, but because I'm here seated across from him at Halo Investing's amazing downtown Chicago offices. So thank you for having us. We're in a studio setting. Usually we're really down and dirty in Tales from the Hard Side, but today we have the privilege of being a little bit higher end. So speaking of which, you and I met years ago. Just let's just start there. I mean, I've been in tech in Chicago. You've been in tech for a long time, and you've been sort of wrapped up in a lot of successes. So let's just start with Chicago tech. I think I met you through Congressman Krishnamurthy, one of his early campaigns, or maybe when he won. But yeah, what's the tech scene in Chicago? Let's just start there, and how do you kind of summarize it?
Yeah, thanks, Rafiq, and thanks so much for being here at Halo and for having me on your show. I think the tech scene in Chicago is amazing, right? It's the great thing about Chicago, and the key thing for tech is talent. It's got great talent, and that's one of the reasons we are here in Chicago. And the Chicago tech scene has gone through a lot of transformation. Chicago is the go-to place for a lot of tech talent coming out of universities. Mostly it was traditionally mostly in the Midwest, but it's also attracted people from all around the country, and sometimes around the world, like myself. I wasn't born in the U.S. I was born outside the U.S., came here for college, and ended up staying here. And it's a very dynamic city. But one of the key things for tech here is that how funding for technology has changed here, right? Like the amount of funds and the size of companies being developed here 20 years ago is dramatically different than what it is right now. There's a great proliferation of technology companies that have been built here, and that's also attracted the big tech majors from either coast to come set up here and set up big offices, which is why you have the Googles and the Metas and all that really attracting talent in Chicago.
And that's interesting. We're going to touch on obviously the energy transition and nuclear and everything else. But what is, Chicago's been a domain for fintech. When I think tech, a lot of it is prop tech, insure tech, fintech. and you're right in the middle of it. And here we are on a hard tech, podcast. So it's interesting, like how that sort of transition happens. Like, so why is a fintech guy like you in a podcast on energy transition?
Yeah, I think one of the key things you said, right, is Chicago has been the center of financial technology and derivatives for a very long time. And it used to be where the exchanges were, and the exchanges transitioned into fintech, sort of like us, which are carrying the torch from what they've built. They've innovated from like 150 years ago to where the world is right now. And what's really interesting, whether you are in fintech, whether you are just in core tech, whether in any other business, we're going through one of the biggest energy transitions of our time. You know,
No doubt.
and which is really, and so it's affecting everybody. It's affecting the people who are financing it, the people who are building solutions, the people who are using the energy, and it really is one of those biggest big transitions. And I think there are a couple of drivers for this. One is, people. If this is one of those situations where people went from using coal, oil, and natural gas to, we've made a big transition from coal in the last 30, 40 years. And most of that transition has now gone to renewables and gone to natural gas. But, with a lot of the net zero targets we are rolling out there, as the world, with all the participants in it, that transition is only starting, and it's going to get a lot bigger. And in that transition, right? So as every company, which is whether you're in financial services or whether you're Microsoft or Google, will have net zero targets, and everybody has to sort of help be involved in some part of the value chain, either financing or producing or creating the energy to help meet these net zero targets. So I think that's going to be a key part of what we do. And as Halo itself, Halo basically,
Yeah, I don't think people know what Halo investing is.
So
just break it down in an easy to understand way.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we sell to retail investors what are called protective investing solutions. So we give people the ability to get access to public markets, like buy the S&P, Apple, Tesla, any equity out there with some structure on it. So it gives you some protection on the downside and some participation in the upside. So Halo is about 7 years old. One of the largest platforms out there, basically tying some of the world's largest banks to advisors and retail investors in the United States and around the world. And we've been very good at that. And in building those solutions, one of the key things to participate in the goals the world has for net zero emissions, and this big energy transition, we are also seeing, hey, these are financing solutions. What can we do to build financing solutions for this? And that's sort of how we stumbled onto this.
So do you have any products that are sort of focused around the energy transition, or green products, or like how are you guys kind of positioned?
We are actually rolling out with some products it'll be by the end of this year and next year. Mm-hmm. Which actually are what we call like green structured notes. So basically, the notes whose payoffs and amounts will be used purely for financing
energy projects.
Climate transitions.
Okay.
So energy projects in different, just sort of how ESG was a big thing, and it's not just about ESG. This is very specific about climate and climate change, and the energy transition with climate change. And it's an important part, whether you are Halo investing, whether you're JP Morgan, whether you're Bank of America, every financial institution will have some sort of product around this. And it's only the beginning, and it's just going to get much bigger.
I think people are used to some sort of ETFs in the market now, or looking at climate-friendly public companies. But this sort of takes it to the next level.
This takes the ETFs and just sort of buying something with green exposure was just the very beginning. What is actually really interesting from all this is actually creating financing vehicles that people can participate in a big way for the full transition, where this transition after some time will not just be optional anymore. It will be it'll be a big part of how everybody operates. And what's really interesting from a geopolitical standpoint is that this war in Ukraine, right, which happened, which started last year, has made energy transition, but also energy security, very important. So it's just coming more and more into the focus, and we'll all have to be part of it.
Yeah, I still want to know what's going on in that nuclear plant, because like who's controlling it and who's like the IEA is down there half the time trying to get it back. It's crazy. But let's talk a little bit about sort of climate as a whole, right? And for our viewers, I mean, you'd have to be under a rock, I think, if people aren't on board yet with why we need to act, right? And Jamie Dimon had a really good annual letter this week, where, of course, he's talking a lot about if you guys haven't seen it or read it, please go Google that, and it's worth the time. But one of the things he said, that the time left to make a difference is coming to an end. And in fact, people talk about this being the decade where we have to act, no matter what's happening in the unfortunate war in Ukraine, or an impending recession or interest rates. The world and the planet's not going to stop. So I think I like to say that the fear that we're in is going to lead to, very quickly, it's going to lead to greed again. And people that are positioning themselves in the right sort of projects, technologies, investments today are going to win. And I think the next wave of unicorns, I mean, fintech and what you guys are doing, I think you already are a unicorn. I don't know if you want to talk about Halo's financing situation, but the next wave is supposed to be from climate technology solutions, right? So what's happening is, despite this great sort of surge in investments that's coming on board, the US government has been at the forefront of it in the last couple of years with the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a strange name, but it just put in $369 billion into climate projects, credits, tech, everything. So guys that are just doing, shopping mall development are going to be going into solar farms as a project, or looking for Halo green options or structured notes to invest in. So I think the money will follow all of that, and it's good for climate as a whole. But whether we get to the net zero goal remains to be seen, right? We're 3.5 trillion. Jamie Dimon just wrote 4 trillion in his annual letter, short annually to get to that goal. So how are we going to do it? Where do you think the bets would be? And energy transition is the tip of the spear. To me, look, I mean, Dipalo is also kind of a hard tech investor. We're a small fund. We do sector agnostic investing, but we're getting more and more into climate. And so we're picking, where can we make a difference in that early stage? So energy transition needs to be in anybody's portfolio. But where do you see sort of the macro climate for how we fund energy transition? What does that mean? Like, what are all the energy sources that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there are a couple of very interesting things happening, and with Halo too, just to tie it into what we're doing, right? Is like, with Halo, we've always said we're about impact, and we have a poster out there saying impact before profit, and for us, what we deliver, the alpha we deliver to the world from financing energy transition, is part of that impact. So it's very consistent with what we're doing, what we've always been doing. But one of the key things with energy right now, right, is that fossil fuels are still like 80%. It's a very high number. It's like 70-80% of global energy.
Yeah.
And we basically have these net zero targets, which in 20-30 years, we're supposed to get off those fossil fuels by, we're supposed to go from 80% to zero. I don't know if it'll completely go to zero, but that's a hope.
Yeah.
That's a hope. That's a goal. That's to go to zero. And that's not going to be easy. That's very hard. But we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a lot more to go. And in making that transition, a couple of things. One is to get to net zero targets, which is just reducing carbon emissions.
And temperature rise.
Is a temporary, very big goal. The other thing is, even if we were to get to net zero targets today, which we can't, but like if we get it to today, which is like right now, if we went to net zero today, we still have all the CO2 that we've emitted over the last couple of 100 years.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so there's two parts of it, like reduce emissions, but also take it out.
Yeah, and I don't know how much, I don't know how much the take it out will completely, how pragmatic we can be about that. But my point is, even if we don't take all that out, right? Like we have, like the climate is changing, has changed already some parts. So the other aspect of this, we have to adapt to climate change too. There's some of the adaptation, even if we were to get to net zero today, we're adapting to some part of climate change, because some of that climate change has changed, some of that has happened already. And adapting to climate change also takes energy, right? And we can't go back and burn new fossil fuels to adapt to that climate change.
Yeah.
So those things, like, which is basically getting to net zero, adapting to climate change. And the third thing, which a lot of people don't discuss, but is actually, I think, very important, is energy poverty. And what I mean by energy poverty is basically that if you look at the developing world, the amount of energy people consume there is like 5-10% per capita of that of the developed world. And when those people start consuming more energy, okay, that also can be from fossil fuels, because that's new emissions in the atmosphere. So to change all those three things will require energy, and for that energy, we have to have ways to finance and create it. So, and we can get into what kind of energy it is, but that's, I think, the three main things we have to think about.
We're adding globally. We're adding. I read somewhere recently, urban areas the size of Manhattan. Like each year, we're adding a new Manhattan to the planet. So and you actually see an increase in that when Africa, parts of Asia, parts of Latin America just starting to really boom, which they are, but that development is not going to stop. So what are the so where does nuclear sort of play into any of this? Because that's kind of been a topic that we have discussed a lot. And besides nuclear, what do you see in hydrogen? People are talking a lot about that. Obviously, there's wind and solar, different projects in different parts of the world. So maybe just give the audience a sense of like the broad sort of renewable energies and just lay it out.
So I'd say two things, like where do we use energy and where do we produce energy, right? A lot of people focus on electric cars and electricity, but electricity is only about a quarter of all the energy production. That's where we use only about a quarter of energy is used for electric. The remaining 3/4 is from a lot of other. It's like producing cement, producing steel, heating our homes. A lot of these other things.
Industrial processes.
Industrial, right? That takes up a lot of energy, which people don't think about. That's actually 75% of energy, right? So you have to change. You can't just change how electricity is produced. You have to change how everything is done.
I mean,
so that's one of the
cement, for instance, I think it's 8%, correct me if I'm wrong, of global emissions.
Yeah, cement is like 8 or 9% of global energy, right? And there's so much. There's plenty of, cement is made from limestone and a bunch of other things. There's plenty of raw material in the world. There isn't clean energy. The problem with creating cement is not the limestone. The problem with creating cement is you have to take all these raw materials, heat it up to 2,700 degrees.
Yeah.
That process is what the
and there's so many interesting startups that are looking for alternative to cement, and some that we've been looking at as well. So the good news is it's going to change, but it's just a question of like when. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, no, and I think the great thing is, right, this is not, we don't have a doomsday scenario. Like, I think people are very, human beings are always very adaptive, like they adapt, they come up with innovative solutions. I fundamentally believe we will. And so in where this energy is used, we'll come with interesting solutions. And let's focus on where this energy is coming from, right? Like I said, 70-80% is coming from fossil fuels. The remaining, and instead of calling something renewable and not renewable, right? I think I prefer to call it, does it emit carbon? Does it not emit carbon? And so if you look at the things that don't emit carbon, it's wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear for the most part.
Mhm.
Those are like the four main areas. And if you look at wind and solar, they've grown considerably over the last 20 years, especially over the last 10, right? They've grown, you've seen a huge growth. You've seen, like in solar, you've seen a big drop in the cost of solar. You've seen big drop in the cost of wind, but also many more of these wind farms go up. The only problem with those two sources are they're called intermittent energy. That is, like, they're not always on all the time. And the problem with energy like that is that you have to have storage if you really want to use that energy.
Yeah.
So when you look at the cost, and the other problem with the energy is that solar farms and wind farms are not usually close to where that energy is needed.
So there's a
Yeah.
lot of transport.
You need transmission. So when you look at the cost of that, it's not just the cost of the solar farm or the wind farm. You have the solar farm, the wind farm, you have transmission, you have storage. You add all that together, it's actually a pretty big cost. The other sources of energy are basically what you call baseload energy, which is something that's kind of pretty much always on all the time. And baseload energy is basically hydro. The two main sources of baseload energy are hydro and nuclear,
Yeah.
right? And with hydro, the problem is most of the rivers that have been dammed to create hydropower
Yeah.
have mostly been discovered. We're not discovering new rivers every year in the world.
Yeah, I don't think there's any that are still uncharted. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all been mostly discovered. So that's been staying kind of constant. What has changed and what will keep changing, I think, to really create this baseload energy is nuclear. I just don't see any other way for the world to solve that without nuclear. And what's really interesting is, nuclear energy was something that was discovered only like less than maybe like 80 years ago. Right, so it was discovered 80 years ago. We had this first renaissance of nuclear from maybe like the 60s to the 70s, and then we, after 3 Mile Island and some accidents,
Chernobyl. I mean, yeah.
Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, right? Like, we really reduced
the one in India, although that wasn't nuclear, that was a union carbide was different. Sorry.
Yeah. So we've reduced basically the growth of these nuclear plants, and I think we're going to come through like a second wave of these.
Yeah.
And the second wave is just going to come from different type of plants, because a lot of new technology, new people, and new processes, and basically different types, right? Basically, the original type of nuclear plants were these large 1, 2, 3 gigawatt nuclear
What
plants.
generation are we in? Because there's
I would say we're entering, like, I would call the fourth generation of nuclear plants.
Is there a fifth?
And there is, like, there'll be a fifth, and there'll be a sixth, and there'll be more, but we're coming into what I essentially call like Gen 4 nuclear.
So what does it cost to build a Gen 4 facility? Like,
it completely depends, right? It depends on the type of facility and more. But actually, what is really interesting, and that's coming out right now, are what are called small modular reactors.
Right.
They're called SMRs. Okay, and what's really interesting about the SMRs is that they can be 100th or 120th or 130th the size of a traditional reactor, which is about a gigawatt size reactor, which is a huge construction project, right? And when you see these reactors too, you see that big dome over all these reactors. those domes are they're just like containment domes. Like the actual reactor is actually much smaller.
Yeah.
Right. And what's really interesting is you have these new generation nuclear plants coming out, which have technology which basically has reduced the size of these nuclear plants to 1/50th the volume of it. And with that reduction in size, you don't need the traditional containment zones and all of that. So it's really bringing out something more advanced, safer, but also has a much higher capacity and potential to create carbon-free emission for the world. And I think what's interesting with all this is the key thing is it's not whether it's renewable or not. The key thing is this carbon-free? Does this energy emit carbon when it's produced, or does it not?
Yeah.
And nuclear
doesn't.
Nuclear is the only solution.
Let's level set it a little bit, because there's another class of reactors, micro reactors, right? So if you look at the energy output, micro is like under 50, I want to say. Is that right? So like under 50 to 300 megawatts.
Yeah, I would say
that's SMR. 50 to,
yeah, I would say micro is what they probably call like under 10.
under
megawatts.
10?
Yeah, under 10 megawatts.
And then SMRs are in that 50 to 300, and then conventional would be...
SMRs would be like a 10 to a few hundred.
Maybe the definition
megawatts.
of SMR is kind of leading down. So what can you do with the micro? What can you do with the SMR? I mean, when you think of the traditional nuclear reactor that cost billions to put up, how do these two classes compare? Like, what can I power with that? Is it the entire, Chicago's grid, the loop, this building? So how does this scale?
Yeah, so when you look at these different classes, right? You have a traditional reactor, which is a gigawatt size. You've got the SMRs, which are like, I would say, 10 or 20 to a few hundred.
Mhm.
And then you have the micro, which is like the below 10, right? You can power with a micro, or the smaller SMRs. You can power like a small military base, or a small like a small camping site, or a small ship, or a small something of that size.
In
Right?
fact, we have nuclear powered submarines.
There are more nuclear reactors on sea than there are on land today in the world.
Yeah.
Right. Which is really interesting, and because in the 50s, the U.S. Navy made a big push to create like nuclear powered submarines and nuclear powered aircraft carriers, and that's really changed where this nuclear power is rolled out. And now, basically, there are a couple of navies. There aren't a lot of navies in the world which have nuclear powered ships, but the very big ones do, and that's needed. But you're going to start seeing the cool thing about these reactors, these small size reactors, is that they will not be rolled out far from where the power is needed. So you don't have this big problem of building large transmission lines. So
That could be a game changer. You think that's a game changer in terms of how people think about kind of setting these up?
I think it's a complete game changer, and it's also, I think nuclear has an optics problem, right? Like,
Of course, yeah, we're going to come to that. Like, hey, I mean,
people always like traditionally, right? But I also think that and you saw this in Europe last year, right? Like, you saw Germany after Fukushima, and Germany and Japan had decided to shut down all their nuclear reactors
right
after Fukushima. Well, guess what? After this Russian invasion of Ukraine, everybody decided, hey, it is more important to have energy security than to have this irrational fear of nuclear. And suddenly, Germany is starting up, these nuclear reactors. Japan's going to keep them going, produce new. That's changed. Basically, this unfortunate war in Europe last year
has a positive sort of impact on.
Has had an impact, right?
Yeah.
Basically, the traditional fossil fuels went from being globalized to the trend went from going away from globalization of energy to more of how can everybody have energy security. To have energy security, they need energy production sources closer to where the energy
and self-sufficiency.
So basically, the idea that you could actually have gas in Russia covering 30 or 40% of your energy needs is not a viable idea anymore. So that's changed how people think of energy in 2022.
France is sort of in the lead when it comes to nuclear in Europe. So are there some lessons learned from what they're adopting? Are they taking on some of the newer technologies like SMR?
Yeah, so I'd say France basically produces, France has actually the lowest carbon emissions per capita of any OECD country. And what's really interesting about that is 80% of their power comes from nuclear. So EDF, which is basically the big French utility, is a very big player in nuclear, but they've most traditionally run very large plants, and they've just made a good operation. They've made a big commitment to this a long time ago, and started running these big plants. I think they'll also. I mean, every country, energy is such a critical part of the security. And the inherent operations of any country. It feeds a lot of other things. It feeds industry, feeds jobs, feeds housing, feeds everything, so that every country from a strategic standpoint is going to start focusing more on energy. And France that way has had a very big focus on energy, and nuclear has worked out swimmingly for them. I mean, they've had everyone has different operational issues, but actually from nuclear in terms of the cost of running these, but also most importantly, the carbon offsets from running these has been great for France, compared to other OECD countries.
So I guess I have a couple of areas on what I'd like to explore with you. One is just going back to safety, regardless of which technology, whether it's the smaller reactors now or the traditional ones, and also in terms of investments that's to come, like let's look at where that trend is going to go. But let's start with safety first. How do we sort of overcome that mindset? I was in Austin for South by Southwest a couple of weeks back, and people were talking about, I think it's a small modular reactor at the University of Texas in Austin, and after 9/11, there was huge security around it, protect the site, etc. 9/11, that is not 9/11. But the idea that there's a reactor somewhere nearby, if people think about it, does freak them out from time to time. But in reality, the accident record of nuclear is relatively super low, right? So yeah, it is different from any other type of energy source in terms of what could go wrong. If it goes wrong, it's very, very bad. So what is the industry safer in general? Like, what's happening in terms of protocols, safety, compliance, and even if you have smaller size reactors, those issues don't go away. You still have to be just as safe with the smallest unit of nuclear energy as you do with the largest. So can you speak to any of that? Like, are we in a better place? Are we getting there with safety?
Yeah, I'd say one of the key things, nuclear. When I've looked at all the different energy sources, right? Nuclear is very much a safety first kind of. It's highly regulated. It's much more regulated. Nuclear of every energy production source, it is the most regulated energy production source in the world, and it's extremely safety first. And in fact, nuclear has had the smallest number of fatalities of any energy source when you look at it on a per energy unit produced, or in any other way. In fact, coal, the emissions we create from coal like kill people every day, right? But people don't think about it. It's sort of like driving versus flying, right? People don't think about it in that way. Psychologically, people are just more afraid of nuclear. But I think one of the key things is the technologies being produced right now in the world will create nuclear reactors and are already creating nuclear reactors with a much better propensity for safety than traditional nuclear, which was, most of the traditional nuclear reactors were produced like 40, 50 years ago. So this is dramatically changing. That technology is dramatically changing safety. And with safety, there are two things that anyone in the nuclear industry sort of looks at. One is safety in terms of accidents and issues around that with the reactor. But the second thing is proliferation. So that's the other thing, which is a different kind of problem, which is sort of proliferation is more like bad actors acting on this. And then nuclear has a unique thing with that. But I
was also going to say fuel, disposal and waste. I mean, there's a safety concern there as well.
Absolutely, and also what's really interesting about nuclear waste is that nuclear waste is actually like a fuel source. Nuclear waste is like 95% useful fuel.
Yeah.
And most of like when you burn coal, that coal is not useful. The residue is not useful fuel. You burn oil, the residue is not useful fuel. It has very little useful fuel. Nuclear is like 95% useful fuel. And I think what's coming out too is more technologies to reprocess that waste. It's not just about putting the waste in a depository or in a repository somewhere in the mountains. It is actually about reusing it and reprocessing it to make it something that's useful. I think the technology is changing there dramatically.
Yeah, that's very interesting because we as there's a lot of startups that are looking at how can you repurpose oil well, or after you're done drilling, like what happens? Well, you can use it for fuel storage and things like that. So it's usually at the surface, it's under the ground, and then how do you sort of prevent it from leaking and everything else? But if that some of that could be repurposed, so I don't know which industries. I guess repurposing is a little bit further behind, but once that kicks in, that also becomes a game changer in terms of trucking, spent fuel across state lines or across, geographies to try to find a place to safely put it away. Let's now turn to sort of the nuts and bolts of what this means in the startup world, right? So how many companies are out there that are doing nuclear stuff? And how does this, like you go from the lab, what are the labs out there? Where's the sort of the center of all of this work in the US or abroad?
Yeah, so I would say there are, there must be like just probably 100 startups in the US alone working on nuclear technologies, just because there's just been a huge opportunity now, and there are many working on new advanced reactors. Many of them are spun out of either universities or national labs. The United States has a great national lab infrastructure, amazing talent there, amazing talent at universities. And you're going to start seeing some of these startups really become commercial, and it's going to take a while. It's not, we're not there yet, but as these startups become more commercial, then when somebody becomes commercial, really shows like a complete closed loop of, hey, producing reactors, selling reactors, producing energy from that, rolling that out, which takes a while in the nuclear space. It's not a fast cycle kind of industry. Then you're going to see many others sort of copy that. But right now in the very early stages, there are lots of startups out there. But many of them really need to figure out parts of technology, but part of more like the commercial and capital strategy, to get that out there. But I'd say some of the biggest places for this research are on the East Coast at the MITs of the world, or the University of Michigan's. A lot of big universities have great nuclear engineering departments,
Right.
And you're seeing good innovation coming.
You were just out at MIT recently too.
Yeah, I was at MIT. I've met folks at many of these different universities, and they've made, there's some really interesting innovations coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm very hopeful about that from an energy transition standpoint.
So how many, I mean, who's in the lead? I mean, maybe not specifically which startups in the lead, but how far away are we from actually having SMR become commercially viable?
Yeah, you've seen some of the few. You've seen there's a startup. I mean, it's more than a startup now. A company called NewScale.
NewScale, yeah.
NewScale actually, I think they're actually public now. They went public through I don't know if it was a SPAC or a traditional IPO.
Yeah, there's Helion, X Energy.
Yeah, so there's NewScale, X Energy, I believe, is going to go public through a SPAC.
SPACs are actually making a little bit of a comeback this year. The 2-year period for SPACs to find a target are starting to come to a conclusion. So you'll see some SPACs come out.
Yeah, I mean, I thought these SPACs were completely dead, but
No.
you're seeing the last few.
You're gonna get quality deals in them, though.
Yeah, exactly. The last few
yeah.
we can only have quality deals, right?
Yeah.
And especially in this
climate,
in this climate and this capital environment, right? But you're seeing the SPACs come out with. I mean, you're seeing X Energy come out in a SPAC. You're seeing. I mean, you've seen NewScale already come out in a SPAC, and they have interesting. X Energy.
But are they actually like? Are they okay? But what's the business doing? You can get financing, but where's the business? I mean, are they?
Yeah, what's really interesting about these is like they have really long cycles. These are like 5-10 year cycles. So NewScale has an approval from the NRC for their small modular reactor, but they haven't rolled out into a lot of commercial places yet, just because the whole issue with nuclear is that with some of the technology that exists out there too, people haven't really the regulatory cycle it takes someone to get the approval to roll this out is just extremely long.
And does that differ obviously between countries? Like we're in the US?
Yeah, it does, but you also remember there are only about 30 countries with nuclear energy right now. There aren't a lot.
So what's to stop other or not to stop, but why can't somebody without nuclear energy go small modular nuclear as a faster way to adoption?
Yeah, I mean, even if you're in a country that doesn't have a nuclear reactor and you want to sort of bring in nuclear energy there, you still have to have a regulator, because this is not something you want to just roll out there and wait for something to go wrong. You want to make sure that something doesn't go wrong. You want to put in, no one can know with 100% certainty, but you want to kind of put in processes and you want to go through, which is what these regulators do, right? But I think you'll start seeing some changes in regulations there, which is needed because some of these regulations were designed for reactors that were 30, 40, 50 years ago. So you'll see more countries come out with this, but the bulk of reactors in the world are in about 4 or 5 countries. And that's going to change. One of them, what's really interesting is if you look at China itself in the next, I think, 15 to 20 years, is rolling out 200 gigawatts of nuclear energy capacity.
What's that as a percentage of their overall need?
I don't know exactly what it is as a percentage of their overall need, but let me just give you just a size of like the United States alone today has about 100 gigawatts of nuclear capacity.
Okay, so China's rolling out 200 of nuclear.
200 of new nuclear.
Okay.
The next, I think, 20 years. So I don't know the exact time frame, but that's China is actually rolling out the highest number of new nuclear reactors. But you're going to see China, India, Turkey, some of these countries rolling out a lot. And what is it telling you, right? That China and India are rolling it out not because of climate change alone. They're rolling it out because of energy poverty. They need a lot of energy for their new cities to develop, for their new industries to develop, for jobs to be created there. So this is.
I'm from Bangladesh originally. They're building their first nuclear plant. There's like 4,500 Russian engineers, not too far from my ancestral home, building a nuclear facility. So interesting times. But just to switch back to financing, we have had quite a bit of interest from the venture community. If you look at the last couple of years, I think some of the bigger guns have been going into nuclear, which goes in the face of wanting to get VC type exits. So some of these guys might be longer term, longer cycle funds, but some of them are your general purpose 10-year VC funds. How will that play out? I mean, are they going to have exits within that time?
Yeah, so I think the financing sources for nuclear have to be different, but what's also interesting is when you look at carbon-free electric, right, or carbon-free energy, not even electric, carbon-free energy, between nuclear, solar, and wind, right? The United States has basically created one of the largest bills with the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of financing that. So one thing is the administration has seen
there's 30 billion for nuclear.
30 billion is only one small part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one part of that, but there's also a lot of other sources, financing sources for nuclear. And what's really interesting is venture funds, private equity, and even platforms like us are like looking at that, and basically that's sending a big signal. What's happening too is Europe is also paying a lot of attention to that. Every other country is paying attention to that. And I think Europe will also is going to create like new financing routes for this, because nuclear has a different cycle than a lot of these other routes. But people also realize it's a very high capacity source of energy, and so even if the cycle is different, even the regulation is different, even if the way people use or tie into this energy is different, where the offtakes are different, they have to adapt to it. You can't ignore it. So this is the basically things like the IRA. What that's changing is traditionally it was only governments writing the entire check. Now there are going to be a lot of public-private partnerships.
PPP.
To PPP and also private power purchasing agreements. For nuclear, and the IRA is really changing how it's happening.
Not too long ago, there was news about the fusion breakthrough. What are your thoughts on that? Just like how viable is fusion versus the regular nuclear being fission?
I think fusion is great PR, but fusion is nowhere close to being commercial. And I think what was really interesting, a lot of people like texted me to send me tweets about that fusion breakthrough. When what's interesting about the fusion breakthrough is, okay, and basically the whole thing with fusion exists, right? Like the only commercial place where fusion exists right now are hydrogen bombs. What they call a hydrogen bomb is essentially a fusion reaction.
Right.
The sun is a massive nuclear fusion reaction, right? But to create that net positive gain in that fusion reaction at Lawrence Livermore Labs, they basically had to pump in the entire infrastructure had probably 300x or very large multiple of the energy needed to power the entire thing. And you could see the U.S. Energy Secretary basically said, "Oh, we will have fusion commercial fusion within the next decade." I don't know if they really had a basis to say that. I think that was a great press conference. I don't know if there was a real basis to say that, but it's great. I just don't think fusion, I just don't, with what I see on the technology there, I don't see if it's anything commercial anytime soon. And when I say soon, I'm saying 2 or 3 decades. So I'm not
Interesting.
I think at some point, yes, it'll happen. But I don't know if it's near term or maybe even in my lifetime. However, nuclear energy itself, on the fission side, I see a lot of progress coming up.
So let's maybe close it out. We're probably coming up on time. Shahan, how are we doing? Or we're over time. I guess in terms of giving people hope, is this like why you're still, I guess why you're involved with this or learning more about it? climate is getting to be a problem that everyone recognizes. Many people are trying to do something about it. Some are big solutions, some are incremental, some are not going to work. And in that context, if you are looking for a game changer that really is a game changer, then is this as close as what we have going on out there today?
I think there are a bunch of things that will be game changer. Like, I mean, I think in the what we're really focused on is the energy transition, and in this energy transition, it will not happen with just wind and solar. It really needs something like nuclear, and nuclear is going to have its. I say it's like SpaceX or Tesla moment, right? Where space was something that was purely in the domain of governments, and it went from being the domain of governments to now where
Privatization.
it's privatized, and basically the private industry in space is going to be the majority of the space industry.
And you can see that sort of a transition here.
You can see that transition. You can see that with electric cars, like where electric cars were again like basically concept cars for the GMs and the Fords of the world, and now everyone is electric, and you cannot not be electric. Same thing is going to happen to the nuclear industry, where nuclear was only done by very large governments, but by some private operators, but only for government utilities. And now it's going to go from that to something that is a private industry. And you're seeing this with IRA and the IRA Act and all this. And I think that every company out there, be it the Microsoft or the Googles, to the JP Morgans, the Bank of Americas, to smaller fintechs than us. We're not as big as Bank of America, not today. However, everybody will be part of this ecosystem in some way, and we have to be part of energy, and we have to be part of climate.
I think Jamie Dimon mentioned during his report. No, he didn't. But he talked about startups.
Maybe next year. Maybe next year.
Anyway, so thank you again for hosting us in your offices and for spending time and helping us think through nuclear a little bit. It's not a topic that is usually at the top of everyone's mind, but maybe in time it will start becoming so. So I'm going to hand it back to Shahan for a wrap up and close. Thank you, Biju.
Thanks so much, Rafiq.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the discussion with our guest Biju and our host Rafiq informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated with all the new and exciting content featuring special guests across the VC community. If there are any topics you'd like for us to cover in future episodes, please let us know by commenting below, and subscribe if you haven't had a chance yet. We'll do our best to address any upcoming topics in upcoming episodes, and we thank you for joining us. We hope to see you in our next session.